I've been doing some cleaning lately, and some of the old stuff I went through were some of my old video games. I picked up my copy of The Last of Us and I thought, man, I remember when that game came out. Ah, good times. Wait a sec, am I feeling nostalgia for The Last of Us? When I think of a retro game, I don't think of The Last of Us. It's all HD and cinematic. But to be fair, it is.
Nah, but it's old, bruh. When you have memories of like old games where you'd be like, damn, those were good times. That's when it's considered as like a little bit retro, a little bit nostalgia. That's why when I think back to like the old Pokemons, I think about what? The old WarioWares. I think about Kingdom Hearts. We don't talk about Kingdom Hearts 3, man. That shit was hot ass. We don't like we talk about like Mega Man and shit. We talk about what? Sonic the Hedgehog, right? We talk about all this shit. All this shit in the past was a banger, and then we played it as kids. You said Verbalisi spent 50K on a softcore animation of him with a has-been hotel
retro,
character.
I think about my favorite streamer, Senpai Retro, OK Champ.
Oh, thank you, Huge Lucky Noah. Is that Low Tier God smiling? Bro, every time I go into Low Tier God's stream, he killing somebody. I could just click his shit. The second I'm in there, he's like, look, literally word for word, bar for bar. I click on Low Tier God's stream. The second I get in his stream, he looks at somebody in the chat and he's like, Cheesecake Jojo, you fucking squeegee. Get that ass banned. Get him out of here. Mods, look at this fucking squeegee. I'm like, a squeegee? The hell is a squeegee?
10 years old at this point. It came out in mid-2013. Is 10 years enough time for a game to be considered retro?
What's a squeegee?
I mean, when the Wii came out, it had the Virtual Console, which was a service on the Wii's online shop where you could download retro games like stuff for the NES, SNES, and Sega Genesis. But the Wii also had Nintendo 64 games, and the N64 was only 10 years old when the Wii came out. Super Mario 64 was technically a launch game for both the Nintendo 64 and the Nintendo Wii. I'm pretty sure
it's
most
still a
people
banger.
back in 2000
And it's still a banger. I don't care, bro. If they would have re-released this shit again. Wait, have we ever had an HD version of Super Mario 64? Oh, they better not do that. Nah, bro, we already got Mario. We already got Super Mario 64 DS. We don't need that shit. No. We don't need this, bro. If Nintendo was to announce this, I'm not gonna lie, I would feel a little upset. I feel like this game doesn't need a remake. The DS remake is perfect, though. I really like the DS remake. I feel like this game doesn't deserve a remake. I swear to God, if in the next Nintendo Direct I see a HD Mario 64, I might actually get upset.
2006 considered Mario 64 to be retro at the time, and Mario 64 was 10 years old at the time. So isn't it only right that we treat The Last of Us the same way now? If we go by the 10-year rule...
No, I agree. I couldn't technically consider The Last of Us not retro. Damn. I wouldn't say retro. I'll probably say classic. Is retro and classic the same thing? You said just because it's been 10 years. I could say it's a classic. Last of Us 1 is a classic. But I ain't gonna say it's retro.
Some other games that would be considered retro now are Minecraft, Dota 2, Candy Crush, League of Legends, and Final Fantasy XIV.
League of Legends is retro. I don't know about that.
People probably wouldn't consider these games to be retro though, probably because these games have continued to be updated over the years. And in fact, every single one of them has had an update within the past 3 months as of the time I'm writing this. But they were all originally released 10 or more years ago.
No, but then here's the thing. I think what makes something considered as like a classic or retro is if the games come out and they haven't been updated. Because if a game is constantly being updated, I don't think you could consider it as a classic or retro because it's still up to date. It has to have years of time of like within like a time capsule of it not being touched. That's why Mario 64, when the game came out, that's what it was. And that's still the same game as it is. There's no updates on the game. There's no frame rate updates, no shaders, no multiplayer mode added to it. It's the same fucking game that it was when we were kids. So that's what considered it as like an old retro game. But all these games, if they're being constantly updated, like if Apex Legends is 10 years old and it's still getting updates, I'm not gonna say Apex is a retro game. Apex is still being updated. Retro and classics are definitely different meaning terms. That's what I said. So give or take 100 years later, Persona 5 will be considered retro. Persona 5, bro. Bro, where's Persona 6?
So you could call all of these games retro. All of this got me wondering, when is a game considered retro? Is 9 years enough to be considered retro? That's how long it took for The Last of Us to get a remake. Is 8 years enough to be considered retro?
Also, I'm tired of the remake era. I'm tired of it. Fuck the remakes. You gaming publishers, make new IPs, you bunch of pussies. Stop the fucking remake era. I'm tired of it, bro. I'm tired of every game being remade, bro. I want new IP. I want new games.
The Game Boy Generation 1 Pokemon games got remakes only 8 years later in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green on the Game Boy Advance. Is 6 years enough? The PS1 classics Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil both got remakes on the GameCube.
Stop cussing.
Only 6 years after their original releases. The Game Boy Advance game Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories got a remake on the PlayStation 2 less than 2.5 years after its initial release. Okay, so maybe a game getting remade isn't a great barometer for deciding if a game is retro.
It isn't. It isn't. If a game gets remade, I wouldn't consider it as retro because, like he just said, a game could get remade within 2-3 years. It's like, bro.
Retro or not. Remasters and re-releases also muddy the water. That's probably why it's hard for me to think of Skyrim as being retro. It was getting—
Yes, true. This game, I don't see the appeal of this dog shit. This game to me, to my core, is ass. I never liked it. I tried it. I fell asleep in the beginning. I woke up. I was on a carriage talking about taking an arrow to the knee. I fell asleep. Every time I fell asleep. This game is fucking boring. Boring as holy hell. Yo, Bethesda, you're trash, bro. You guys can't make games, bro. Every game y'all make, I fall asleep. Fuck Skyrim. Fuck Starfield. I ain't doing shit in space. Y'all making me sleepy.
Re-released on a new system every few years.
Yes, every year!
Remasters and re-releases constantly keep these games in our minds, and in a way, sort of mentally prevent them from being considered retro.
That's
but
true.
To be perfectly honest, I don't even think this is necessarily a good reason to keep a game from being considered retro. Look at Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Genesis in 1991. This game was re-released or remade at least 5 times before the game was even 10 years old, and some of the re-releases were on the original console it first came out on. But even with all of its releases, back in 2002, the game was considered to be a retro classic game, and it was included.
Because you got to take into consideration this. Even though a game gets remade, though, whenever we're talking about retro, we talk about the original copy. We don't talk about the remakes. I don't know if that's anybody else in the chat, but that's me. When I talk about something as being considered retro or a classic, it's the original. A game could get remade 8 times. I'm not going to consider those as the classics. I'm going to consider the original copy that came out, the initial release one, as the retro one.
Included on the Sonic Mega Collection. So why did games that were around 10 years old feel retro back then, but games that are around 10 years old now don't feel like they're retro at all?
Why? Because we're adults. That's it. When we were kids, the jump from polygons to 3D, like even look, the jump from 2D to 3D was insane. And then when they went from 3D polygons to then like actually like smoothing out the character models, them actually having like hands that are not like triangles and shit. And then also us growing up.
So I decided to ask my audience. I did a poll asking people when they considered a game to be retro.
15 to 19 years old, kind of true. I could agree with that. 20 plus years is insane. Who's the 1% that said 1 to 4 years old? The fucking trolls.
Retro. Like I expected, basically no one voted for 1 to 4 years old. I mean, maybe if you're a kid, a game that came out 4 years ago might be retro for you, but besides that, yeah, I wasn't too surprised no one voted for this. There were a very small number of people that said games that were 5 to 9 years old were retro, and yeah, that one I can't agree with. There's no way I'm calling Dragon Ball FighterZ, Red Dead 2, Detroit Become Human, Monster Hunter World, and Among Us retro games, at least not for another several years. A somewhat sizable portion of people considered games that were 10 to 14 years old to be retro. I was actually a bit surprised more people didn't pick this one. 10 years is a nice round number that feels like a long time. 10 years is a decade ago. But hey, the results are the results. The next biggest slice of the vote went to games that are 20 plus years old. Going by that number, some games that would be considered retro today are Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, The Simpsons Hit and Run, and Jak 2. Yeah, I'd say 20-year-old games are easily old enough to be considered retro. All of these games feel pretty old. The majority of people who voted said that a game is considered retro when it's at least 15 to 19 years old. And yeah, I would probably vote for this option too. So if we use that metric, some games that would be considered retro now are Call of Duty World at War, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, Left 4 Dead.
Not retro. You see, that's the problem. It's like when we hear the word retro, we think of like 8-bit. We think of polygons. We think of the graphical. Bro, it's just, you know what it is? It's the graphics. It's the graphics. That's what it is. Because World at War, I'm not going to say is retro, but I'm going to say it's a classic.
Considered retro now are Call of
World at War ain't retro. It's a classic.
Duty World at War, New Super Mario.
That's a classic.
Bros. Wii, Left 4 Dead.
Classic. Not a retro. It's a classic.
Batman Arkham.
That's a classic. Not a retro.
Asylum and Bayonetta.
Classic. Not a retro. It's the graphics, bro. Yeah, it's because we're getting older and because of the graphics. Anything that I consider as retro, if their hands don't look like polygons, you saw how Cloud looked like in Final Fantasy VII? Motherfucker had like, his hands look crazy. If they don't look like that, I don't think they could be considered as retro. They gotta look. Is Ocarina of Time retro? Yes. Yes. Ocarina of Time is retro. Majora's Mask. Anything from the GameCube forward is not considered as retro anymore. It's considered as classic. That's me. Anything from GameCube back, retro. Anything GameCube forward. GameCube and forward is classic. N64 back, retro. Wind Waker, you said Wind Waker is not agreed. Would you say Wind Waker is a retro game? I wouldn't. I would say Wind Waker's a classic. Wind Waker's a classic.
These games all feel just old enough to have that retro label. I'd be okay with saying 15-year-old games are retro. Now, let's look at the comments and see how people felt about the topic. This one person says, I think the 3D days may have obstructed how we think of retro. I remember even during the early 2000s, the NES and SNES days was pretty retro already.
You know why it was pretty retro already? Is because the graphical jump that we made, bro. When we went from Super Nintendo to N64, and we went from two-dimensional pixel sprites to 3D polygons, and then from 3D polygons, we went straight into fucking, you know, GameCube, like characters looking smoothed out, Mario Sunshine, Mario Party 5, Mario Party 4. Bro, the jump was insane. That's why we're considering stuff the way that we're considering them.
This is a good point. One of the things that may influence how we feel about a game being retro or not is how the game looks. The more modern a game looks, the more difficult it is to see the game as being retro. For example, it's hard for me to think of a game like Resident Evil 5
That's
as
my
being
game.
retro. But
you see, look, Resident Evil 5 is not retro. That's a classic. I love this game, bro. If they were to remake this game, literally me 8 seconds ago talking about fuck the remake era. But if they remade this shit, nah, retro, you gotta stick to your gut. Don't remake it. But Capcom, if you go and remake something, yeah!
Do think of Scribblenauts as a retro game, even though Resident Evil 5 came out the same year as Scribblenauts.
I love this
Resident
game.
Evil 5, while outdated by today's standards, is still 3D and has some element of realism in its graphics, while Scribblenauts uses 2D sprites. 2D games, especially 2D games with pixel art,
Do you think
just
the bar
feel
for retro and classic will keep pushing as the years go on? So eventually GCP S2 and Xbox will end up in the retro section, and then some of the more modern consoles will end up in classic territory.
You said, do you think the bar for retro and classic games will keep pushing as the years go on? I feel like they're gonna get pushed on as the years go on because obviously technology is constantly advancing. So I feel like, cause look, I thought about this the other day. I was like, when I heard that they were making a PlayStation 5 Pro, I was like, what are they upgrading? I don't think graphics could get as good as how they are now or better. Like, chat, can somebody explain to me how they can get more graphically advanced? Like I don't know. Me personally, like where we're at in graphics, I'm like, I feel like it's already at a perfect place. Like in my head, I can't think how much more realistic it's gonna get. Unless we're using VR and I'm actually in the game and I could touch titties and I'm like, if I feel like Kirito, like if I put on a VR headset and I feel like Kirito, I think that's the next step, bro. You said they're gonna start pushing 8K. I mean, like, bro, what's the like is 8K gonna be that big of a jump? Like what is 8K, bro? It's like our eyes could only see like what, like 120 frames a second. Like I see motherfuckers out here being like, hey man, I'm playing this game at 500 frames a second. Bro, my eyes could only see a certain amount of frames anyway. So it's kind of like, you said there's no point. That's what I'm saying. There's no point. Even 4K, there's no point. Like I've seen people play in 4K and I'm like, wow, this looks great. But then I'm like, okay, 4K to 8K.
Hello.
What's the difference?
Here you go.
Oh, thank you. Delicious chalky.
Ran out of whipped cream.
Oh, thank you. You said just have a good written game? Oh, yeah. You said they lied on the box. It's called diminishing returns. Increasing graphics won't be as much of a priority. Increases of frames, frame stability, and maybe ray tracing will be on the new big thing. I'm not gonna lie, that's not bad. If like time goes by and a PlayStation 5 Pro comes out, I might get one just so I can play it on my freaking Sony TV because I still have my OG PS5 back here that I use for streaming, and I really don't touch it unless like I'm live or whatever. But for the PlayStation 5 Pro, I feel like if they put more RAM, more memory, and then obviously they made like I guess the graphics card better, like you said, for frames and frame stability, that'd be amazing. But in terms of graphics, I'm like, bro, this is why I'm not gonna lie, I feel so happy in terms of me growing up in the era. Like, I'm so glad I'm a 90s baby, like a early 90s kid. Like, I was there through all this shit. I was there through the Game Boy. I was there through the Game Boy Advance. I was there through all the games coming out and shit getting better. Bro, I was there through it all, so I got to experience that shit. Yo, Zoomers, I ain't gonna say Zoomers. You know what? Generation Alpha, bro, they're cooked. They ain't even gonna know, bro. Like, the second they spawn on Earth, they have the finished product. And I'm like, bro, I was here when we were playing Pong, bro. We were playing Pixels, bro. Bro. Even with cell phones, bro, we had physical buttons. Nothing was touchscreen, bro. We had physical buttons. Yo, imagine texting with numbers 1 through 9. I had to hit 111333 space 5Y5 12333. Bro, we had the hard. Oh my goodness, bro. Dude, yo, you said Retro was playing stick and ball, bro. I was playing all these old ass shit. We got to. You said you were not alive while you were playing Pong. Well, guess what, Electric? I got to play Pong still, even though I wasn't alive when Pong came out. But I still got to play it. I was here during all the technological advances. I don't care, bro. Anyway, you know what? Pong is ass. Who made that shit up, bro? It's literally just a screen with a white pixel, bro. That shit ass.
Older than 3D ones. Like, for example, did you know that Dead Rising and Mother 3 came out in the same year?
Because of the graphics, I could say Mother 3 is a retro. Mother 3 is retro.
Mother 3 feels like a dinosaur to me, but Dead Rising seems old but not ancient. I guess this point is pretty obvious. Games that look more retro feel more retro. And the feeling you get from playing the game is a large part of what determines what is retro or not. This comment here kind of sums up this point. I think it's less about how much time has passed and more about how much gaming has evolved since. Because there isn't really a quantifiable amount of time that you can pinpoint for when a game becomes retro. This perspective makes a lot of sense. Being retro is less of a time thing and more about how the gaming landscape has.
And I'm gonna die on this hill. Pokemon games, when they were like this, they were better. I said it. Better. They were better. They had more charm. They had more characteristic. They were better. Game Freak, you know what? If I was in charge of Nintendo, guess what? I would fire the whole Game Freak team. Hire new people. Same thing with Sega. Sonic team, fire all of them. I'm tired of it, bro. Fire them all. I need new games.
Has changed since the game's released.
Yo.
Look at Kirby's Adventure, which was released in 1993 on the NES.
You said I'm worse?
The NES
I'm crazy.
was originally released in 1983 as the Famicom in Japan, meaning Kirby's Adventure was released when the console was basically 10 years old. But Kirby's Adventure, while impressive for the console it was released on, still feels like an NES game. It feels the exact same to me as Excitebike and Punch-Out! Another comment had a similar sentiment. I don't really think I could call anything on GameCube or PS2.
Do a double backflip.
A double backflip? Bro, you're trying to see a death on stream. That's what you're trying to see. You're trying to see me die live. Hell no. Thank you, Button Can. I appreciate it. But I literally said this. I don't think I could call anything on GameCube or PS2 retro. That's what I literally said. Anything N64 and back, retro. Anything GameCube forward, classic. That's it.
To retro. What you got then is really what you get today in most respects.
Mhm.
I do doubt that generation will ever be looked at like we look at the NES, unless in 20 years we can be absorbed into the code itself or something.
I literally said that. Unless I could put on a VR headset and I teleport into a world and I'm like, hey, I'm a beta tester. And I can see cute girl avatars in the game and I could physically be like, oh shit, I could.
Personally don't agree that GameCube and PS2 games aren't retro, but I do understand the idea behind the perspective. The 6th generation of consoles
This game is ass! I said it!
really solidified 3D games. In-game cameras improved, voice acting improved, budgets got bigger, development teams got bigger, online play even started to become more common in this era. As a whole, many of the staples of video games nowadays started in that era.
Was the Star
Part of
Ocean?
The reason why I personally see games from this
Ooh, Halo? Ooh.
era as being retro is because I grew up with this era. Like I mentioned before, a game being retro is a
That is also true. It depends on when you're growing up and what games you're playing. Because guess what? Generation Alpha, when they come out now, guess what? They got Spider-Man 2. They got all these like super graphically advanced games that are out. When everybody from Generation Alpha then grows up 20 years from now, they're going to consider Spider-Man 2 as a classic game. But I'm going to be an old-ass motherfucker talking about,
that shit a classic. It's not retro. I don't know. That shit a fucking classic, bruh.
a lot about feeling.
Classic!
And since I play games of this era in my youth, that nostalgia that I get when I play these games makes them seem more retro to me. To someone who didn't grow up with these games, it
ooh,
may
Star
not
Wars
be that way.
Battlefront?
Someone else had a completely different perspective. I see retro as more of an era rather than something that expands over time. Everything on consoles released before 2000 is retro to me. This is an interesting take. A game being retro isn't about how old it is or how it makes you feel, it's a clear-cut time period. The same way we have eras in history like the Middle Ages in
True.
Europe and the
You know
Wild
what?
West
I
in
agree with that.
America
I
and
agree.
the Meiji period in Japan. Maybe for gaming, there's a retro era, a
Mhm.
retro age. The more I think about it, the more I'm starting to like this idea.
Yeah.
But hey, maybe you think it's stupid. So I guess let me know.
You said Persona 4 Golden gonna be a retro game in 30 years. Nah, that's the thing, bro. I mean, well, for me, it's not. I'm gonna be old as shit and I'm gonna say it's a
classic. It's a classic.
That's what I'm gonna say.
In the comments when you think a game is considered to be retro. Is it when a certain amount of time has passed? Is it when you get a feeling of nostalgia? Or is it when the game was released after a certain date? Or maybe it's none of those things. But anyway, that's all I've got to say. I'm gonna get out of here. So, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.
Very good video. Very good video, Keto. Very good video.